Hi there everyone, this time I will do a commented video so that you can focus on the video instead of reading. Here we go. What will be covered here? Roughly XPlane, G to XPL, SimHeaven, High Definition Mesh, OSM to XP, World to XPlane, and more about generic 3D modeling for XPlane in use with World to XPlane. XPlane. Without any add-ons, when you take off from the wrong place, it's not as nice as you may have seen on videos on the internet. There are some very beautiful videos which show the potential of XPlane. Of course, it all needs to be tuned, and installing add-ons is a must in order to get the graphics to really shine. So, once you have installed XPlane, you'll no doubt need to download much more. I really like XPlane, but as a European, the default scenery really looks awful. I'll just cover the basics of add-ons needed, at least the one I use. Let's start with the ground textures. If you have ever flown around your home area, and I'm sure you will have likely recognized and followed the streets, right? A nice little tool, G2XPL, would have transformed your first flight into a wow. I won't cover this great tool, thanks goes to Robert by the way for this great program. Instead I will redirect you to simheaven.de. What's that? It's a site hosted by the kind and helpful pilot Baloo, his nickname, who is from Germany. SimHeaven is the easiest and quickest way to cover the ground with real aerial pictures, and the scenery can simply be downloaded from site. This should be the first step. For your information, AllPilotX, his nickname, has worked on a great project, the High Definition Ground Mesh. What's Mesh? To keep it simple, he is the one to which we owe the High Definition Ground Mesh. In other words, finer ground details such as hills, mountains, etc. with much more detail to make it look even closer to reality. His latest High Definition Mesh V2, as it's called, is already included in most of, if not all already, SimHeaven's ground satellite tiles. So it's useless installing both at the same time, as SimHeaven scenery already includes AllPilotX work. To learn more about this, I invite you to read carefully what they propose and how it needs to be installed from both of their sites, SimHeaven and AllPilotX. So far so good. Now that I've covered ground textures and HD mesh, I'll quickly bypass the airports you have to download too. I prefer the photoreal ones, but of course the others built with generic libraries are also very nice. Most airports are covered, payware, freeware, there is almost everywhere for everyone's region. Here is a very nice tool too, which shows the different airports available with ratings. Thanks goes to Mario for this. Now that you've downloaded all required stuff and have installed your local airports, you will recognize from the air your local area, thanks to aerial pics and your high definition ground mesh. But, as we are never happy and always want more, hey, it's all flat and has wrongly placed auto-generated houses all over the place. We want more reality. OSM to XP. Have you heard about this? This little tool programmed by Benny some time ago is able to place facades and some 3D objects and forests into XPlane as long as the area is covered by OSM data. I will leave you to consult Google to find out what OSM is, which is an acronym of Open Streets Map. So this little tool in combination with an OSM file will fill the OSM mapped region with facades. This is already a big step forward to a as real as it gets experience. But let me introduce you to a newborn, quickly progressing and always improving free application, World to XPlane, programmed by Tony. This is for me by far the ultimate replacement of the well-known popular OSM to XP tool, which has now reached its limits. Why do I believe, and of course it's always just a matter of opinion, it's better than OSM to XP? What does it add to the scenery that OSM to XP doesn't? Well, in short, it does way more than OSM to XP. Remember, all is always in relation to OSM data, so if there is no OSM data, then there are no objects. Here are a few things it does. Placing building facades, placing forests. So far OSM to XP does all of this. However, World to XPlane also places 3D houses if available, builds streets and streetlights, cuts through forests if needed to place roads correctly, draw fences, places random hay bales, tractors and so forth onto farmland. Fire hydrants, parking cars on the side of the roads if the road runs through a village or town, adding extra realism. Put cars onto parking lots. They can't just be left empty, do you agree? And more. All this is still in development and still improving every day to achieve always the best results. The software is highly configurable, so in order to get sceneries working on low-end machines as well, as not every computer will run default settings smoothly, and to be honest, these days PCs just aren't built to support full graphic options with heavily charged sceneries, so there will be some choices to be made about what and how you should fill your scenery. And here is where your contribution will come in to help improve the available scenery 3D. So far, some users have contributed local houses and buildings already. I myself am making 3D houses and was able in a few working hours to contribute over 1000 generic looking house models. My first goal was to make it look a bit more realistic from the air. Also, I took care of distributing black and red roofs, and due to World to XPlane, it's now possible to define the percentage of red and black roofs that will show up. For a little irony, I'd like to let you know, but you of course are the judge of what's coming up. A Belgian user on a French site nicknamed Le Belge told me that I am an inexperienced 3D newbie modeler. Of course, not telling you that I've worked a lot with AutoCAD and 3ds already. Let's get started on how I have worked out those few generic buildings. For those who can't afford or simply don't want to get payware for any reason, you'll be happy to hear that I have exclusively used SketchUp for all my work. Blender, also freeware, is way better for more complex objects of course, and I have tried both and felt comfortable on both, but for my needs SketchUp was my preferred and quickest choice. This is not a step-by-step tutorial, but it might help you to get an idea of how I do it. It might also be a good base to start with if you intend to build 3D houses for use with World to XPlane. The idea is to do as many houses as possible with a single texture sheet. Well, not really one. To get fastly black and red roofs covered, I would make 2 textures. I won't cover the how to make textures, but saying that, you will need to find a plausible texture and make them seamless. In other words, make bigger wall textures with tiny parts. Let's take a look at my first texture I'll use for the SketchUp build. You will notice it only has black roofs, and you'll also notice the white lines around them. Those lines are used to get the correct dimension when placing the textures onto the 3D objects. You wouldn't like to get a normal standard window as big as a double garage door, would you? I'll cover this later on. Underneath the black roofs, some wall textures. Remember I told you about seamless textures. These wall textures are made out of very tiny parts, duplicated and cleaned so you wouldn't see the translations of my copy-pastes in between those little parts. It's a little bit of a work, but it's very useful and time-saving afterwards. I think it took me about 3-4 hours of work understanding, research and putting it all together. Fast infos about your texture. It must be a power of 2, like 512 by 512 pixels, 1024 by 1024 or 2048 by 2048, etc. One big texture is more efficient than many tiny ones. Now you don't get it too detailed. Remember, it's a flight simulator, not a car driving sim. Also, it has to be a PNG format. If you don't need transparency, take it off too. It's the alpha channel. The PNG format can later be compressed with the XP tools to the DDS format with XGrinder. Modeling your house under SketchUp. Besides textures, there are 3 very important points to keep an eye on. Keep it very low on triangles. Center the base of the objects onto the X and Y axis. Lower the basement into the negative Z axis. Keep it very low on triangles. Why? Your objects might be placed 1000 times into the scenery. The more efficient it has been built, the faster it will be rendered on screen, the more FPS you might save. How to keep the triangle count low. A 3D object is split into triangles for the GPU to render. A rectangle, in this case, would consist of 2 triangles. Here is one of my first houses in wireframe. Can you see all those triangles? Bad. Now here's a more recent one, wireframe. Can you see the difference? That's the goal, less triangles. Center the base of the objects onto the X and Y axis. Why? World to XPlane will search for the best fitting object above the OSM data. To keep it simple, let's say it's a rectangle of 4 by 6 meters tagged as a house. If World to XPlane finds a 3D house which fits that OSM rectangle, it will place the object by aligning the center of the 3D house base onto the center of the OSM rectangle. So remember to always center the base of your 3D house onto the X and Y axis. Lower the basement into -Z axis. Why? Sometimes the terrain isn't flat, so your house might be on the ground at one side but floating at the other side. We do not want this to happen, so we need to lower the basement as shown. Remember to do this whilst doing the texturing, leaving some free wall underneath to lengthen the base into the -Z axis. So, a short summary of the 3 key points. First, keep triangle count low. Second, center your house on the X and Y axis. Third, lower your basement into the -Z axis by some meters. If you keep in mind those 3 important points, then you will make efficient houses. Now a short word about texturing. This is the most easy part if prepared well. What I did, I used the texture just for the 3D modeling, including white lines. Each line is 1 meter of the other, so I get real measures of my texture. This makes it an easy way to get a good texturing with right measures. Here an example of what Le Belge did a time ago and which in my, according to him, inexperienced 3D modeler opinion is wrong. These houses are wrongly textured and don't fit into the scenery. I just permit myself these critics cause he claims to do the best and most realistic sceneries but doesn't accept constructive critics afterwards, neither correcting anything painful. Look at this. Windows as big as a garage car entrance. So texturing needs also to be properly placed and in the right dimensions. So this little sarcastic comment is over for my own pleasure. Back to the point. You can build yourself 3D houses for your region or others. If you don't want to, you could at least contribute on OSM data. Now that's all, folks. Hope you enjoyed. With a bit of luck you learned something more, and if I made a mess somewhere in my explanations, please feel free to point me at, and I'm sure I did some. Each point is far being completely covered, of course, especially if you already know about. There's a lot more to cover on each of them. Only way to dig it all through is googling and reading, then of course testing and playing around to get used to. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks to all contributors. And here's some special thanks to the following forums, including their users, for their support and tips: xplane.org, avsim.net, xpilot.com and irosoft.com, Deutsches Forum. Hallo Leute! Special thanks goes directly to the following people: AlpilotX for providing high definition mesh data for XPlane, Pilot Baloo, hosting SimHeaven and giving access to satellite tiles and new OSM sceneries. Benny, programmer of the older tool OSM2XP. Tony, the programmer and site holder of the fantastic tool World to XPlane. Robert for his G2XPL tool. And hell, I hope I haven't forgotten anyone else. Thanks to all others who are following and reading this. I would say listen to this. Happy flying to the XPlane community. Thanks for watching this video. Cheers, Blackie75. Over.